When this black man spoke the truth, then the entire legal system collapsed. He was wrongfully accused, but refused to back down. A shocking truth emerged in the courtroom. His fight for justice exposed a corrupt system, leaving everyone in stunned silence. Andre Collins stepped off the plane, stretching his stiff muscles after the long flight. The air inside the international airport felt thick, carrying the familiar mix of coffee, disinfectant, and the faint scent of jet fuel. People moved in waves around him, some eager to reunite with loved ones, others trudging toward connecting flights. He adjusted the strap of his carry-on and followed the crowd toward baggage claim. A digital board flashed arrival details as he reached the carousel, scanning the conveyor for his suitcase. He hadn't checked in much, just essentials for his trip and a few souvenirs. As he waited, he pulled out his phone, checking messages. Nothing urgent. The belt jerked to life, and suitcases tumbled onto the rotating platform. Andre spotted his, a dark blue hardshell case with a scuff mark on the side. He stepped forward, lifting it off the carousel with ease. Just as he turned to leave, two customs agents approached, their navy uniforms crisp, expressions unreadable. "Excuse me, sir. Can you step aside for a moment?" one of them asked. Andre frowned. "Something wrong. Routine screening. Won't take long." There was no point in arguing. He followed them toward a checkpoint, where a stainless steel table stood under bright overhead lights. Travelers walked past, a few slowing to glance in his direction before moving on. One agent, a stocky man with a buzz cut, gestured toward the suitcase. "Open it, please." Andre unzipped the case, flipping the lid open. The agent put on gloves and started moving items around: clothes, a pair of sneakers, a toiletry bag. Andre remained calm. He had nothing to hide. Then everything changed. The agent's hand paused. He reached deeper into the suitcase, then pulled out a tightly wrapped package. Another, and another. White powder peeked through the torn edges of plastic. The air in Andre's lungs turned heavy. The second agent, a woman with sharp eyes, gave him a hard look. "Sir, can you explain this?" Andre took a step back, his stomach twisting. I have no idea what that is." The buzz-cut agent held up one of the bricks. "Looks like narcotics to me." Andre shook his head, his pulse picking up speed. "That's not mine. I didn't put that in there." The woman's stare didn't waver. "This is a serious offense. I know that. I swear to you, I have nothing to do with this." The next few moments blurred into chaos. His wrists pulled behind his back, cold steel cuffs locking into place. He tried to resist, but hands pressed against his shoulders, forcing him still. A uniformed officer murmured something into a radio, and within seconds, more personnel arrived. People stared. Some whispered. Andre felt his world shift, a sinking weight pressing down on him. He had been set up. His mind raced, grasping for logic. Someone had planted the drugs. Someone had wanted him in this position. But who? And why? As he was led away, his vision locked onto a figure standing near the terminal's glass barrier. A man in a charcoal suit, hands tucked casually into his pockets. He wasn't looking at a phone or waiting for luggage. He was watching. Andre's gut twisted. Whoever he was, he knew something. Then, just as quickly as he had noticed him, the man turned and disappeared into the crowd. After some time, Andre sat in an interrogation room, the air stale with the scent of old coffee and sweat. A single overhead light cast a harsh glare on the metal table in front of him. His wrists, sore from the tight cuffs earlier, rested on the surface, fingers curled into loose fists. Across from him, two federal agents sat, their expressions unreadable. The older of the two, a man with graying temples and a sharp gaze, leaned forward. "You want to tell us how a suitcase full of narcotics ended up in your possession?" Andre exhaled through his nose, keeping his voice steady. "I already told you. I don't know. Someone planted it. That wasn't in my suitcase when I packed." The younger agent, clean-cut with an air of practiced skepticism, crossed his arms. "So, you're telling us you had no idea you were transporting a large quantity of drugs across international borders?" Andre held back his frustration. He had been in their position once, questioning suspects, looking for cracks in their stories. He knew how this worked. "That's exactly what I'm telling you. Check my record. I was a cop for 10 years. I don't touch drugs. I don't deal." The older agent let out a short breath, exchanging a glance with his partner. We checked. You had a good career, by all accounts. Then, suddenly you resigned. Care to explain why? Andre's jaw tensed. He knew they had already read his file, but they wanted to hear it from him. I tried to expose dirty cops in the narcotics unit. They were running drugs instead of seizing them. When I got too close, they turned on me. Made my life hell until I had no choice but to leave. The room was silent for a beat, the agents studying him. The younger one tapped a pen against his notepad. And now, years later, you happen to get caught smuggling drugs. That's quite a coincidence, don't you think? Andre leaned forward, meeting his gaze. No, it's not. It's payback. Someone wants me buried, and you're helping them do it. The older agent's eyes flickered with something. Was it recognition? He didn't confirm or deny the accusation, but he did lean back in his chair, arms resting on the table. I'll be honest with you, Collins. You're in a bad spot. The evidence is strong. Your prints are on the suitcase. Flight records confirm you brought it from overseas. This isn't a misunderstanding we can sweep away. Andre's chest tightened. He knew the system. Innocent men went down all the time because the truth didn't matter as much as the case being airtight. I want a lawyer. The younger agent smirked. That's your right. But let me ask you something first. Do you really think a lawyer can get you out of this? Andre didn't answer. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of doubt. The older agent stood, gathering the file in front of him. We'll be in touch. As he reached for the door, he paused. You've made some powerful enemies, Collins. Maybe you should have stayed out of their way. Andre watched him leave, his gut twisting. He had spent years trying to move on, trying to forget the faces of those who had threatened him when he refused to stay quiet. But the past wasn't done with him. And if he didn't find a way out of this, it would destroy him for good. Andre's mind running through every detail of the last 24 hours. The scratchy orange jumpsuit felt foreign against his skin, a sharp contrast to the crisp clothes he had worn just a day ago. The walls around him, thick with years of confinement, seemed to press in as he waited. The distant sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, growing closer with each step. A guard stopped outside the bars and tapped the metal with his baton. Your lawyer's here. Andre stood, shaking off the stiffness in his limbs. The door slid open, and he followed the guard down the dimly lit corridor. Each step felt heavier than the last. Whatever his lawyer had to say, he knew it wasn't going to be good. Inside the small consultation room, Serena Vaughn sat with a folder open in front of her. Her sharp brown eyes met his as he took a seat across from her. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit, her expression unreadable but serious. Andre, she began, her voice steady but firm. We have a problem. He let out a slow breath. Tell me something I don't know. She pushed the folder toward him. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Not just the drugs in your suitcase. There's more. Andre glanced down at the documents, flipping through them. His name was stamped across flight records, financial statements, and reports he hadn't seen before. Serena continued. The prosecution has flight logs showing that you traveled to a country flagged for drug trafficking. You flew in and out of a hotspot, Andre. That alone puts you under suspicion. He shook his head. I was on vacation. I didn't meet with anyone. I didn't do anything illegal. She studied him for a moment. There's more. A bank account was opened in your name months ago, one you supposedly never knew about. It has large wire transfers coming in and out, money that makes it look like you were paid to move the drugs. Andre's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. That's impossible. I don't have another account. It's not impossible, Serena said. It's identity fraud, and it's airtight. The transactions were carefully placed to make it seem like you've been involved in this for a while. Whoever did this didn't just set you up. They built an entire case against you long before you even set foot on that plane. Andre's pulse hammered in his ears. Someone had gone to incredible lengths to destroy him. This wasn't a simple setup. It was a calculated, deliberate effort to make sure he had no way out. If we don't find proof that this was fabricated, Serena said, you could be looking at life in prison. The words hung in the air between them. Life. He had spent years fighting for justice, and now he was the one sitting on the other side of the law, accused of something he hadn't done. He clenched his jaw. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Serena nodded. And that means they left a trail somewhere. We just have to find it before it's too late. Andre leaned back, staring at the wall behind her. His mind worked through the possibilities. Someone had set him up, And that meant someone had made a mistake. One small crack in their perfect plan. He just had to find it before the system swallowed him whole. The suitcase. That was the key. He had checked his bag before leaving, and there was nothing out of place. But at the airport, a man had been watching him. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Travel hubs were full of people who stared too long or loitered near the baggage claim. But now that moment stood out. The way the man had lingered just beyond security, the way he had turned away too quickly when Andre had looked in his direction. Whoever he was, he had been there for a reason. A metallic clang snapped him out of his thoughts. The guard making rounds barely slowed as he slid an envelope through the bars and moved on. Andre hesitated before reaching for it. His name was scrawled across the front in uneven handwriting. No postage, no official markings. Just a thin slip of paper inside. Stay quiet, or you'll never make it to trial. Andre's grip tightened around the note. His eyes darted to the hallway, but the guard had already disappeared. His pulse drummed in his ears, not from fear, but fury. This wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Whoever had orchestrated this wanted him silenced before he could prove his innocence. He forced himself to breathe, to steady his thoughts. This wasn't the time to panic. This was confirmation that someone on the outside knew he was getting too close. It also meant that they weren't sure how much he had figured out yet. That gave him an edge, however small. He folded the note and tucked it beneath the thin mattress. If someone had managed to get a message into his cell, they could just as easily send someone to search his belongings. He had to be careful. The next morning, Serena Vaughn sat in her office, her desk buried beneath stacks of files. Her usual composure was strained, her jaw set as she scrolled through flight manifests on her laptop. The airline had been reluctant to release the records, but persistence had paid off. She knew Andre wouldn't smuggle drugs, but proving that in court required something tangible. Her eyes caught on a name, one that didn't belong, or rather, one that didn't exist. Fake identities weren't unusual in smuggling cases. People used aliases to move illegal goods all the time. But this passenger had boarded with Andre's flight, had sat only a few rows behind him, and had disappeared without a trace once they landed. No recorded hotel stay, no credit card transactions, no official record beyond the flight log. Serena grabbed her phone and dialed. "Andre, I found something." His voice was quieter than usual when he answered. "What is it?" "There was a passenger on your flight using a fake identity. No past records, no digital footprint beyond that single trip. That's not just suspicious, it's deliberate." Andre's mind worked through the implications. So either this guy was the real courier, or he was the one making sure everything went as planned. "Exactly," Serena said. "And if we can figure out who he really is, we might be able to tie this back to the people who set you up." Andre exhaled slowly. "A lead. A real one. Find out everything you can." "I'm on it," she said before hanging up. Andre set the phone back on the receiver. But the brief surge of hope was short-lived. If they were closing in on the truth, that meant whoever had sent in the note wasn't going to sit back and watch. They would act. And when they did, he needed to be ready. He sat back down, rubbing a hand over his face. The walls of his cell felt smaller than they had the day before. His enemies were still in the shadows, pulling the strings. But now he had something they didn't expect. Proof that they weren't as careful as they thought. The next morning, Serena Vaughn arrived at the courthouse, her mind racing as she reviewed the evidence on her tablet. A sleepless night had led her to an important breakthrough: security camera blind spots at the airport. A specific section near baggage handling lacked proper coverage, leaving just enough space for someone to tamper with Andre's suitcase without being caught on official footage. Inside the consultation room, Andre sat across from her, his eyes sharp with determination. He listened intently as she laid out the findings. "There's a gap in the footage," she explained, placing a printed airport map in front of him. "It's small, but it's enough for someone to plant the drugs without being seen." Andre studied the diagram. "So, if we can prove someone used that spot, we can argue the drugs weren't mine. It's a start, but we need more." She tapped her fingers on the table, thinking. "I put some feelers out last night. An old contact reached out. He says this wasn't random. Your enemies in the force had a hand in setting you up." Andre's jaw tensed. He had made enemies over the years, corrupt officers who saw him as a threat. He had exposed dirty cops before. It seemed they had finally decided to return the favor. Serena leaned in, lowering her voice. And there's more. A crooked DEA agent might be involved. Andre's pulse quickened. DEA. She nodded. Someone with access to travel records and a reason to protect certain people. This agent helped plant the drugs and covered their tracks. If we can link him to the corrupt officers, we have a case. Andre exhaled, processing. Then we need to take this public. Serena frowned. Are you sure? The press could make things worse. No, he said firmly. If we go public, they won't be able to bury this. It'll force an investigation. After a long pause, Serena nodded. All right, let's make some noise. Later that evening, news reports began circulating. Serena had leaked just enough to raise suspicion, mentioning inconsistencies in Andre's case, hinting at law enforcement corruption. It was enough to put pressure on the system. And then, a breakthrough arrived. A hidden airport security tape surfaced. Serena burst into the holding cell, eyes alight with urgency. We got him. Andre sat up straight. Ooh, she pulled out her phone and played the footage. Grainy, but clear enough. A man in an airport uniform, switching Andre's bag with an identical one. Andre's stomach twisted. That's it. That's the proof. Serena nodded. We're taking this to the judge first thing in the morning. The next day, armed with new evidence, Serena stood before the court. The judge reviewed the footage, the falsified travel records, and the bank transactions. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. After a tense deliberation, the charges were dropped. Andre walked out of the courthouse a free man, but the fight wasn't over. The corruption scandal exploded, leading to multiple arrests within law enforcement. The crooked DEA agent, along with several officers, were taken into custody. But Andre knew this was just the beginning. Standing outside the courthouse, Serena asked, "What now?" Andre looked out at the flashing cameras, at the reporters waiting for a statement. "Now," he said, a steely resolve in his voice. "Now we take them all down.